Hello, my name is Agnieszka Pikulicka-Wilczewska and this is Turan Tales, a podcast about Central Asia. It delves into stories of people, politics, social change and more, and is part of my newsletter which you can support on Substack. Welcome and be my guest in the journey to Central Asia. Hi listeners! This week we'll look at an important regional story, one that I covered for several years. That is cotton, or oltin, the white gold as Uzbeks call it. It is not a crop endemic to the region. It requires a lot of water. So in a way, Central Asia, with its water scarcity, is not the best place to grow it. Especially the region's two biggest producers, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So the 8th and the 14th largest cotton producers in the world, respectively, large parts of which are deserted. While cotton indeed is deeply respected in the local culture, which we will discuss a bit later, its cultivation has had some tragic and long-term consequences for the local environment. Cotton fields have been irrigated using water from the two main regional rivers, Amudarya and Sirdarya, through a network of canals, many of which have been poorly designed. As a result, between 30 and 70% of the water is lost because of leakages or evaporation. In consequence, the river water that was supplying the Aral Lake, located between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, stopped flowing in, and with time, around the 1960s, the lake began to desiccate. Today in Uzbekistan, the Aral Sea is located 150 kilometers away from its former shores in Muynak, once an important Soviet port. With the withdrawal of the sea, the town lost its main industries, which were connected with water and fishery, and then much of its population, as people began to leave for Tashkent, Kazakhstan or Russia in search of work. The chemicals and fertilizers used in cotton production were left on the dried-out seabed and soon began affecting the health of local populations, causing respiratory and other diseases. But the catastrophe did not affect the production of cotton, which has remained Uzbekistan's main export product. Throughout the 1990s and until the coming to power of Shavkat Mirziyoyev, cotton picking was a national undertaking. Each year, in autumn, that is during the harvest season, hundreds of school children, teachers, doctors, nurses, civil servants, and even the army took to the fields to pick cotton as free labor. Those who had enough funds would pay professional pickers to do the job for them. When I first traveled to the cotton fields as a journalist in 2019, child labor was no longer a systemic problem, and Uzbekistan had already stopped forcing doctors, nurses, and teachers to pick cotton. But the problem of forced labor persisted. State quotas for cotton were still in place, and it was common that civil servants and representatives of local tax offices or town administrations were forced to either do the job themselves or pay for professional pickers. The work is not easy. You have to bend down in the scorching sun for many hours a day, and meeting the required 50 kilograms per person a day is really impossible for an unskilled worker. With time, the practice has become less widespread, and eventually in 2021, the International Labour Organization announced that forced labor on cotton fields was no longer systemic and systematic. The Cotton Campaign, who for years had called for the boycott of Uzbek cotton, ended the boycott in 2022, so 1 year later. While this is good news, the cotton sector is still subject to various types of abuses and issues which we will discuss a little bit later. Importantly, forced labor is still being practiced in Turkmenistan. According to the recent report by Turkmen News and the Turkmen Initiative for Human Rights, covering the 2024 harvest, state-imposed forced labor in Turkmenistan is still widespread and systematic. I have added a link to the report in the body of this week's Turan Tales newsletter, so feel free to check it out. The authors of the report acknowledge that Turkmenistan authorities have indeed made some steps to improve the situation at the cotton fields and, for example, stopped mobilizing doctors and teachers of some schools. This was also the case in 2023, so the previous harvest. But public authorities continued mobilizing or extorting state employees, including staff of schools, kindergartens, hospitals, cultural centers, and utilities organizations. With my today's guest, Umida Niyazova, the head and founder of the Uzbek Forum for Human Rights, who has monitored the situation on cotton fields in Uzbekistan for many years, we will discuss various subjects related to cotton in Central Asia. I have asked Umida about her personal story and how she ended up setting up her organization in Germany many years ago. I asked her what cotton means for local populations in Central Asia and what are the main problems in the industry in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan today. Welcome to Turam Talks. My guest today is Umida Niyazova, who is an Uzbek human rights defender and the founder and director of the Uzbek Forum for Human Rights, an organization which has been monitoring the harvest of cotton on Uzbek fields since 2010. Hi, Umida.
Hello, Agnieszka. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm really glad to host you, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation. Before we get into details of what the cotton industry looks like in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan today, I would like to ask you about your personal journey with the cotton story, because you were actually arrested in Uzbekistan in 2008 in relation to your work. Can you briefly tell us what happened and how you ended up in jail and then in exile in Germany?
That's right. So I've been arrested in December 2008 when I was ironically coming from the OSCE seminar on democracy and journalism in Bishkek. When I arrived at the airport in Tashkent, for some reason, security service wanted to check my laptop. So they took my laptop, they brought me to a separate room, and they invited the officer who they said from the Agency of Mass Communication and Information. And so they asked me to open my laptop, and the officer quickly looked through my files, and he immediately came with the conclusion that the content of files in my laptop contained the information dangerous to Uzbek society, to the security, and also the interviews with the relatives of religious prisoners, and as well as Human Rights Watch report on Andijan massacre. These files, these documents had been found as contraband of religious extremism materials. Yeah, so I've been sent to pretrial detention center. It's Tashkent prison, and I spent there 4 months. And I've been sentenced to 7 years in jail initially at the first trial. But thanks to the international outreach and, first of all, the international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and many others, I've been released. So this was not just released. So I was restricted from freedom. So I was not been able to travel. I had to stay at home at the night, and I had to go to police station every month to report about my activity, I guess. Yeah, so I spent something almost a year under this kind of restricted freedom situation. And then I was pardoned. So I received the amnesty of the president, and I was allowed to leave Uzbekistan. So at that time, it was I would say, the kind of darkest period of Karimov regime. There was many activists, journalists in prison, and it was so dark and so repressive that I thought that it's only way to somehow continue like human rights activity. It's just to be outside Uzbekistan. So I left, and actually the Uzbek government not only actually imprisoned me and then kicked me out and forced me to leave Uzbekistan. Then I found that the Karimov regime also took out my citizenship. So I came to Germany again, thanks to the support of Human Rights Watch, and asked for political asylum because I didn't have any citizenship at that time and didn't have place to go. So for a few years, I am a German citizen, but at that time, I didn't see myself outside, Uzbek society, because I was very involved in the very beginning in Uzbekistan. I worked as a human rights activist, and knowing about so many problems, especially about the child labor and forced labor in the cotton sector. So I thought that, I just have to do something. And I founded Uzbek Forum for Human Rights. And I think that we contributed, as an organization, we contributed a lot to eradicate system of child labor and forced labor in the cotton sector.
It's a great achievement, obviously, because we know that this is not happening in Uzbekistan anymore. But are you allowed to enter Uzbekistan now? Do you go back?
Since I left Uzbekistan, so in 2009, I was not allowed to travel to Uzbekistan for 13 years. Then in 2021, somehow I received the signals that, yes, it is possible for me to travel with my colleagues from Cotton Campaign. And I think this was a time when Uzbek government started I know that at that time, Uzbek government started negotiations with the Cotton Campaign coalition around the lifting boycott of Uzbek cotton, which I can maybe tell later on. And so I was allowed to go to Uzbekistan in 2021. Since then, I think I traveled to Uzbekistan 3 or 4 times. But last year, it was exactly last year, when I was traveling in Fergana, I was approached by 2 unknown men who started filming me, accusing me of organizing information attacks against Uzbekistan. And I left, and unfortunately, I was not able to interview farmers as it was planned. So I consider this was a signal for me that I'm not welcomed anymore to Uzbekistan. And I know that this is related to to my work, that we are, despite the eradication of child labor and forced labor, we are continuing reporting about other remaining problems in the cotton sectors. It's the property rights, land rights issue, farmers' exploitation, and Uzbek state, of course, not happy with this.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen quite a few of such examples in Uzbekistan, that the state is sending seemingly random people to attack human rights defenders. But this is not exactly what we are meant to talk about today. So let's go back to cotton. And we know, and I hope that our listeners know too, that both Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, which currently are some of the, biggest cotton producers in the world, Uzbekistan is the 6th and Turkmenistan is the 10th, are largely places that have limited access to water. Turkmenistan is basically a desert. So why in, these kind of environment, out of all the other places, the Russian Empire back in the day decided to grow cotton.
That's right. A number of historical facts indicate that the arrival of cotton in Central Asia began actually with the Civil War in the United States, which changed, as reported, the global cotton industry. The United States was the main supplier of cotton, but due to the Civil War, cotton supplies to Europe were blocked and cotton prices skyrocketed. At the same time, the Russian Empire began its expansion and seizure of territories in Central Asia. And the Russian Empire then purchased cotton from the United States and sought its own sources of raw cotton for its textile industry, which was already quite developed and in dire need of cotton. Thus, the southern territories of Central Asia, with the most optimal climatic conditions for growing cotton, its southern part of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and all of Uzbekistan were turned into cotton base for the needs of Russian Empire's textile industry. And after the collapse of the Russian Empire, when the republics of Central Asia were formed and all became part of the Soviet Union, Uzbekistan's status as a major cotton producer only strengthened. In the 1930s, so it's almost hundreds years ago, the Bolshevik developed a comprehensive program to boost the cotton industry in the Soviet Union, with Uzbekistan being given a special place as the main cotton base of the USSR. And this was followed by the construction of a huge network of canals to irrigate the cotton fields, cotton ginning factories, chemical fertilizers plants, agriculture machinery factories were constructed, and of course railways to transport cotton to Russia. Prior to this, there was no cotton industry in Uzbekistan.
And obviously we know how it ended. So basically because cotton requires a lot of water, thanks to this, the Aral Sea, for example, dried up, started to dry up around the 1960s. But in the Central Asian culture, especially in the Uzbek culture, cotton began to acquire a different meaning along the way. It's been called the white gold, right, in the Uzbek language. So why do you think it became so important, culturally?
I believe that the environmental and socio-economic consequences of Uzbekistan transformation into cotton kind of powerhouse have not yet been fully assessed. So cotton is grown in all Central Asian countries in varying amounts and therefore has a different impact on the economies of these countries. So Uzbekistan produces, meantime, more than 3.5 million tons of raw cotton per year. Turkmenistan produces about 1 million tons, followed by Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Yes, the cotton consumes a lot of water, and as a result of water being taken from the main rivers that feed the sea to irrigate cotton, the water level in the Aral Sea began to drop rapidly, and the Aral Sea, which was actually the fourth largest lake in the world, split into two bodies of water, and most of it dried up, forming a salt desert in its place. And having grown up in Uzbekistan, I am well aware of what cotton means to the country. So the cult of cotton began to take root in public consciousness of Uzbeks back in Soviet time, when it was assumed that we as Uzbeks should all be proud of supplying cotton to the textile industry of the whole Soviet Union. At that time, Uzbekistan was producing up to 5 million tons of cotton per year, although this figure may have been exaggerated because of Pripiska. But anyway, the leaders of the Soviet Republic were proud to announce every year the ever-increasing cotton production in Uzbekistan. And when Uzbekistan became an independent republic 30 years ago, this narrative that cotton plays a very special role in Uzbekistan didn't change, cotton still dominates people's minds as a national monoculture that cannot be abandoned under any circumstances. And I remember one of the first reports by our organization on the situation of forced and child labor, which was called "Cotton is not a plant, it is politics." These were the words of a farmer I interviewed almost 15 years ago. And now, after all this time, I can say with confidence that cotton in Uzbekistan is still not seen as a plant. It takes up a huge space in people's minds.
So how was the labor around cotton cultivation changing? So how was forced labor on cotton fields in Uzbekistan and also other Central Asian states introduced?
Significant problems such as child and forced labor among pickers and farmers' rights, land and property rights violations are a legacy of Soviet policy. At that time, a system of state orders for cotton production was introduced. This meant that farmers who leased land from the state had to produce a certain amount of cotton for the state. And during the 30 years of Karimov's rule, as well as the 8-year term of the current president of Uzbekistan, this system of state order or state quota for cotton production has remained unchanged. And for the past 15 years, so I've been studying the cotton sector in Uzbekistan, and my organization conducts annual monitoring of the working conditions of workers in the cotton sector. And when we began our monitoring in 2010, the state was forcing children to pick cotton on a massive scale. Yes, schools and universities would close every autumn, and the school students had to pick cotton instead of going to schools. So there were many accidents and deaths, and working in the cotton fields was dangerous for children's health. But I didn't see any resistance from the parents. And in numerous interviews conducted for our research, parents said that they themselves had picked cotton, that nothing bad had happened to them, and repeated the propaganda slogans they had been taught. So cotton is white gold, it's wealth of the people. And even child and forced labor during the cotton harvest was justified by the fact that if the cotton was not harvested, the state would not able to pay pensions or salaries to teachers and doctors. In reality, it was a simple system based on exploitation to reduce the cost of cotton production.
I interviewed a number of people who picked cotton, and it is not an easy job. Can you explain what it looks like and what does it require to actually pick cotton?
Yes, still around 85% of all cotton crop picked by hand. That means that every autumn there is a need of almost 2 million cotton pickers to go and pick cotton. And an average one cotton picker during the first months of the cotton season can collect around 100 kilo of cotton by hand. This is under the very hot weather. Honestly, I never picked cotton, to be honest. And I can't imagine to spend hours and hours and hours under the sun picking cotton by hand and bury this heavy cotton, the tubes. I don't know how to say this. This is a very, very heavy job. And unfortunately, still there is no machines to pick cotton. And government sees that the cotton picking during the autumn, this is the one of the chances for rural population to pick cotton. But as we see for the last few years, rural population doesn't want actually to pick cotton because it's a very, very hard labor and it's not paid enough.
I think it's important to add here that very often people who pick cotton are actually elderly ladies who get to sleep in very rough conditions because they usually sleep in those provisional camps, sort of like picker camps, not far from the cotton fields, where the conditions are not very good. Very often, there are just mattresses. There are no proper beds. The food and water is not adequate. So the work itself is very, very difficult. I would like to ask you about this thing. I mean, maybe you know, maybe you don't know. Why cotton production in Uzbekistan still hasn't been transferred to machines? Because in countries like the United States, Australia, or Israel, which are also cotton producers, the cotton harvesting is done by machines, by professional cotton pickers. Why it hasn't happened in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan yet?
I do not have answer to this question. As I understand that Uzbekistan needs investments to the cotton sector. They don't have enough resources to buy the cotton picking machines. This is one of the reasons. For the last few years, as I know, they are buying machines, so there are more machinery picking. But at the same time, when in 2021, the government raised the purchase price for cotton, and accordingly, farmers were able to raise wages for cotton pickers. There was kind of enough people to pick cotton, and this was seen as an opportunity for rural people to earn like real money during the harvest. But this was back like 4 years ago, and this is not the case anymore. So I saw that the recently World Bank, I think, investing a lot to buy cotton picking machines to Uzbekistan. I hope that the cotton picking will be mechanized soon.
So before Mirziyoyev came to power, and in the first years of Mirziyoyev's rule, there were still children at the cotton fields. There were soldiers, students, teachers, doctors, so people working in the public sector, or people working in the public administration, because this included also people working in tax offices or like the local hakimiyat, so local administration in different areas. And this actually continued for some time, even after doctors and children and students were banned from picking cotton at the cotton fields. Very often what was happening was that people who had the resources, so for example, people working for the tax office or the local administration, would be required to pay someone else to pick the cotton for them, because picking cotton is not easy. And there were obviously quotas that had to be met. So only someone really skilled in cotton picking was able to meet the quotas, which were really high. So this required basically people to spend their own money to fulfill those quotas. What has changed since Mirziyoyev came to power? Because I know that I was at the cotton fields in 2019, 2020, and you could still see the government officials such as, the soldiers or tax people still being required to pay for the pickers to pick cotton. What has changed now? And do we still see examples of that?
So when Mirziyoyev came to power, he understood the problem of child labor and forced labor very well. Yeah, he had previously served as prime minister under President Karimov for 13 years. By that time, the boycott of Uzbek cotton by international brands was expanding and could no longer be ignored. So Mirziyoyev deserves credit for this. It was his political decision to end the state mobilization of forced cotton picking. Although some improvements had already begun during the last 2 years of Karimov's rule. So the state stopped forcing school children to pick cotton in 2015. With Mirziyoyev's arrival in 2016, students were exempted from cotton picking, followed by school and hospital employees. And as a result, in 2022, my organization, Uzbek Forum for Human Rights, released a report stating that the state no longer organizes mass forced labor, although cases of coercion remain at the local level. Nevertheless, so central policy has been aimed at eradicating forced labor. And President Mirziyoyev announced his ambitions to turn Uzbekistan into a cotton hub in Central Asia and develop the textile industry. So before him, Uzbekistan produced raw cotton and sold it to the third countries such as Bangladesh, China, and Russia. So it was a primitive economy. So over the past 5-6 years, the cotton and textile industry in Uzbekistan has been undergoing reforms, but this process has been accompanied by massive violations of the labor rights of farmers, raw cotton producers.
So can you explain exactly what sort of violations we're talking about? And can we still see the examples of, I don't know, tax officials or, local administration officials paying with their own money for someone else to pick cotton?
Yes. Our findings from the latest cotton harvest, 2024, so we reported that the local incidents of local hakims forcing civil servants, employees of government organizations to pick cotton continues, and extortion also continues. But this is not the central government policy. At the same time, the risks of forced labor is still high. So, reforms are not easy, but unfortunately, we see that the main burden falls on farmers and workers. So they are most vulnerable segment of population. And the state order or state quota for cotton and as well for grain and silkworm cocoons has not been abolished. However, in several analytical documents, for example, I recently read a World Bank analysis on it says implementation of agricultural development strategy, which was introduced by Uzbekistan in 2019. It claims that the main achievement in agriculture of Uzbekistan was the abolishing the state quota for cotton production, which is not the case. So in 2021, the state decided to solve the problem of forced labor by raising the purchase price of cotton and accordingly the pay for pickers. However, so the state's role in the cotton sector has not changed. So farmers are still required to grow cotton for private clusters as the land is allocated exclusively for cotton cultivation. And according to experts, and you had been asking why Uzbekistan still cannot abandon cotton production. So, and I also I asked a few experts, and so the state has invested heavily in the development of the textile industry, like for the last few years, and now so cannot imagine that the industry will be left without local cotton. Even if, as claimed, Uzbek cotton is more expensive than cotton on world markets. So despite the eradication of forced labor of cotton pickers, the situation for farmers who are cotton producers has not really improved because starting with the 2022, actually, cotton harvest, many so-called cotton clusters. They are private companies who are buying cotton from farmers instead of they replaced the state. So it's them who are buying cotton, raw cotton from farmers now. So clusters, they stopped paying farmers the market price for cotton and then stopped paying them even the reduced price set by the state. So this
why they stopped paying the price?
Yeah, because they so the cluster said that they're experiencing enormous financial problems. Many of them have gone bankrupt, and because they say the fall of the raw cotton on the world market and the decreasing of the like the consumers, like there's a lot of textile production after the pandemic, and just simply there is no consumers to buy their like cotton fiber or cotton yarn, which they were intended to export. So the Uzbek cotton, the textile production are under enormous pressure because they just don't have buyers. So, and when clusters stop paying farmers have become impoverished as a result. And farmers have not been, so because they have not been paid for cotton, right? And down the chain, so impoverished farmers are unable to hire workers and pay them adequate wages. And also, I think it's important to understand the context in which farmers in Uzbekistan who grow cotton and also grain work. So they are put in the position when at the same time they must fulfill government orders to produce certain amount of government ordered products like grain and cotton, while theoretically being proclaimed independent entrepreneurs. So the state still controls farmers' use of land, as land can only be used for its intended purpose, controls and requires farmers to meet their quota. So it's contractual obligations to clusters. State can seize land when the quota is not met. So the entire system is similar to planned economy model, with farmers accountable to government officials, and the system is designed to ease exploitation and vulnerability of the farmers.
And do we have any trade unions in Uzbekistan? I know there was an attempt to create one trade union organization when I was there. It was several years ago. I think it was 2020 or 21. But has anything improved in this matter?
In terms of the creation of independent trade union or in terms of freedom of association, nothing has been improved. The state is not registering any grassroots independent organization. Our colleagues in Uzbekistan tried to register small NGO. For instance, there is one initiative group in Nukus. They've been trying to register labor rights NGO for several years, and it was unsuccessful because to collect the documents to submit for registration, it's such a bureaucratic process. They've been not even able to collect such documents. So, and I don't see that and I think that in terms of freedom of association, situation is worsening. And yes, there was a very exciting initiative actually it was created, and as we reported at that time, only one known democratically elected trade union. So these are workers, around 300 workers of Indarama Agro. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of it's Singapore-based, but it's registered as a LLC in Uzbekistan, so Indorama Agro. The field workers, producers of grain and cotton, they just gathered on the fields, and they introduced or created trade union to be able to negotiate the labor rights conditions and contracts with the cluster, with this company, with Indorama Agro. It was actually very exciting, very unusual for Uzbekistan.
I know, because I remember I traveled there with a friend of mine for the first press conference back in the day.
Ah, yes. Yeah, this was a initiative. Unfortunately, this trade union doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it exists theoretically, it's still there, but state, the local authorities, secret service people, police, local hakimiyat, plus management of Indorama, they all made it sure that So first of all, they forced, not really forced, but they made the main funder of this union to leave. So it was the leadership had been changed. Then the Indorama Agro changed the whole labor model and didn't prolonged the labor contracts with the workers. And these workers who were members and initiators of the trade union committee, they kind of lost their jobs and they became service providers for Indorama. So the company just allocated a certain amount of land to them, and now it's working under the service providing contracts where workers are not really workers. They are independent contract farmers who are obliged to produce cotton and grain for the company. Okay, so they made sure that the trade union will not exist.
This is obviously a very sad summary of what's happening in Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, even though the forced labor system has been abolished, it still doesn't necessarily mean that the situation overall has improved much. But the reason why I asked you to speak to me today was that a few days ago, or a month ago, actually, in May, the Cotton Campaign that you are part of has released a report about Turkmenistan and about the continuous use of forced labor on the cotton fields there. So can you tell me what exactly the situation in Turkmenistan is now? Is it the same as it used to be in Uzbekistan? Is the system working similarly, or is it somehow different?
That's right. So Turkmenistan produces about 1 million tons of cotton per year, which is less than Uzbekistan, but it's still a lot considering that the population is much smaller than in Uzbekistan. As was the case in Uzbekistan, so every autumn the government of Turkmenistan forces civil servants to pick cotton. And so recently, Turkmen NGOs released a joint report on the situation in Turkmenistan's cotton sector. So human rights problems, labor rights problems in Turkmenistan's cotton sector are similar to those in Uzbekistan, which we all have inherited from the Soviet Union. So according to the latest findings of Turkmen colleagues, despite some initial steps to address the problem of forced labor, such as not mobilizing doctors and teachers in some workplaces and increasing the picking rates to intensify voluntary picking, state-imposed forced labor remained widespread and systematic. So public authorities and heads of state institutions continued to mobilize public sector employees to pick cotton or extort them to pay for replacement pickers. And the Cotton Campaign Coalition, of which Uzbek Forum is a member, has developed a cotton pledge similar to the Uzbek cotton pledge. So there is a Turkmen cotton pledge. And as I know, to date, several dozens international companies have joined the boycott of Turkmen cotton. I really hope that the situation in Turkmenistan improves over time. It can be done while preserving the authoritarian system of government as it happened in Uzbekistan.
So what do you think we in the West can do to firstly improve the situation of farmers in Uzbekistan, farmers who are producing cotton, and also to put pressure on the Turkmen government to abolish forced labor? What can we do?
Yeah, unfortunately, now it's not the easy time for human rights organizations to advocate for human rights and labor rights in Central Asia countries. It seems that with the policy in the changing in US, we kind of lost the America as an advocate for human rights. And I just hope that I hope for the public pressure for consumers, because at the end of the day, I don't think that anyone wants to consume products with the forced labor, right? So awareness raising is important. And I also hope that because Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan is trying to find buyers of Uzbek textile, that the government, the state understands that actually to free the cotton sector can bring the good investors. Because as far as I know, the investors are looking on Uzbekistan, but they consider Uzbekistan is still too risky. And if situation improves and so farmers will get more rights, more freedom, and the reforms continues as it was planned, I think that the country could attract good investors. So, I just hope that this economical kind of rationality will prevail.
And do we know about any companies, textile companies, that are using Turkmen cotton? Because I understand, we do not boycott the Uzbek cotton anymore, but with Turkmen, the situation is a little bit different. So do we know any particular brands that are using Turkmen cotton?
As far as I know, the very recently produced report on Turkmenistan, it's actually not only about the forced labor, but also there are a lot of information about the supply chain, so where Turkmen cotton goes. So who is interested, which countries and enterprises buy Turkmen cotton could find this information in the report.
Okay. So if anyone is interested in getting more information about which brands use Turkmen cotton, I encourage you to check the report. Thank you so much, Umida. It was great to talk to you, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. Good luck to you.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Turan Tales on Substack. I look forward to meeting you there and on my newsletter's social media.